always thought life changed in loud moments. Accidents, arguments, doors slamming. But the moment that changed my life was almost silent. It was just a whisper. I was standing in the narrow airplane aisle, trying to slide my backpack under the seat. People behind me were impatient. Someone bumped my shoulder with their carry-on. A baby cried 2 rows back. The usual chaos before takeoff. I was exhausted. Weeks of fear and almost no sleep had hollowed me out. My eyes burned, my head throbbed, and all I wanted was to sit down, buckle in, and disappear for a few hours above the clouds. I finally dropped into my seat and let out a shaky breath. That's when I felt a hand lightly touch my shoulder. It wasn't aggressive, not even firm, just intentional. I turned, expecting someone to ask if I could switch seats or help with a bag. Instead, I saw her. A flight attendant, maybe mid-30s, dark hair in a perfect bun, navy blazer, red scarf. On the surface, she was the picture of calm professionalism. But her eyes were too sharp, moving too quickly. She glanced over my head at the passengers still boarding, then down the aisle, then back to me. There was something like hesitation in her face, as if she was deciding whether she should say the thing she already knew she had to say. Then she leaned in. Closer than any flight attendant had ever leaned in. I could feel the warmth of her breath near my ear, smell the faint lavender of her perfume. And in a voice barely louder than the hum of the engines, she whispered, "You have to get off this plane. Immediately." For a second, I didn't even understand the words. My brain just froze. "What?" I whispered back. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't explain. Her face reset into that neutral airline smile, the one designed to reassure nervous passengers. She straightened, nodded like everything was normal, and moved on down the aisle as if she'd asked me what I wanted to drink. I stared at the empty space she'd left, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You have to get off this plane. Immediately." The sentence echoed in my mind like it had been screamed, not whispered. Why me? Was there a problem with my ticket? Did she mistake me for someone else? Was there some secret mechanical issue she wasn't supposed to talk about? A logical person would have stood up and asked. A brave person would have grabbed her arm and demanded an explanation. I did neither. Instead, I told myself I was overreacting. That I was tired. That maybe she'd meant something else, or I'd misheard her, or this was just a weird misunderstanding. Passengers kept filing past. The overhead bins slammed shut. The safety demonstration began. My chance to leave was shrinking with every second. I looked at the aisle one last time, at the door that was still open. I could have walked out. I could have listened. But I didn't. I fastened my seatbelt, sat back, and forced a slow breath. I told myself it's too late now anyway. I didn't know it then, but that tiny decision, that one moment when I refused to move, was the reason everything that followed nearly destroyed me. To understand why I stayed on that plane, you need to know why I boarded it in the first place. I wasn't a tourist. I wasn't going on vacation or heading to an exciting new job. I was running. A month before that flight, my life still looked normal from the outside. I went to work, paid my bills, scrolled through my phone in bed at night like everyone else. But inside that normal were cracks. Small at first, then widening. It started with little things. My bedroom light would be on when I came home, even though I was sure I'd turned it off. My front door would be locked, but the chain would be unhooked. My phone would vibrate with a call at 2 a.m., but when I answered, there was only quiet breathing. Then a click. I told myself it was stress. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then one evening I walked into my apartment and stopped dead in the hallway. A chair from my living room had been moved. Not just moved, but placed directly in front of my bedroom door, facing it. Like someone had been sitting there, waiting. Called the police. They checked the locks, the windows, the fire escape. They found nothing. They asked if I might have moved the chair myself and forgotten. I laughed, but it sounded fake even to me. A week later, I woke up to find my bathroom mirror fogged, even though I hadn't showered yet. In the center, written in the condensation with a fingertip, were 2 words. "We're close." That time I didn't call the police. What could I even say? Hi, there's a creepy message on my mirror and I live alone. I scrubbed it away and tried to convince myself it had been some strange trick of moisture. But I barely slept after that. Then, 2 days before the flight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're not safe on the ground. Leave before it's too late. No name. No follow-up. I stared at the message for a long time. Felt connected to the mirror. To the chair. To the footsteps I thought I heard in the hallway at night when no one was there. This time I did go to the police. They shrugged, told me it was probably a prank, suggested I change my number and avoid overthinking it. They didn't understand that I wasn't overthinking. I was trying to stay alive. So I did the only thing that gave me a flicker of control. I went home, opened my laptop, and searched for one-way flights leaving as soon as possible. I didn't pick the destination because it was special. I picked it because it was available and far. When I clicked book, my hands were shaking. The night before the flight, I barely slept. Every noise in my apartment sounded like someone trying to get in. I packed a small bag, some clothes, my passport, a few documents, and sat by the window until the sky turned pale. On the way to the airport, every car that stayed behind me too long felt suspicious. Every stranger who looked at me felt like they knew something I didn't. By the time I reached my gate, my nerves were shredded. But I told myself this flight was my reset button. Once I was in the air, I'd finally be safe. I believed that. Right up until the moment the flight attendant leaned down and whispered, "You have to get off this plane." Immediately, I thought I was running away from the shadows. I didn't realize they had already boarded with me. After takeoff, you'd think the hardest part would be over. The ground was gone, the city was shrinking beneath us, and the cabin settled into that familiar rhythm of quiet conversation and the hum of the engines. On the surface, everything looked normal. But I couldn't shake the whisper. Sat in the back of my mind like a weight. I scanned the cabin, trying to find the flight attendant again, to read her expression, to see if she looked like someone who had just tried to save my life, or someone who had tried to move me into harm's way. I spotted her near the front, demonstrating how to buckle a seatbelt for a passenger who'd clearly seen it 100 times. Her smile was warm. Her posture was relaxed. To anyone else, she was just doing her job. But her eyes kept moving. Not casually. Not lazily. They were scanning. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second thing was the man in row 9. I was in row 13 on the left side of the plane. Every few minutes, the man 4 rows ahead would turn his head just slightly, just enough to get a look at me. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. People look around on planes. It's cramped. Happens. But then it happened again. And again. And every time our eyes almost met, he jerked his gaze away. He wasn't curious. He was checking. Then I noticed the 3 men who had boarded last. They slipped in just before the door closed. No carry-on bags, no jackets, no fuss. They moved with a kind of quiet confidence, as if they knew exactly where they were supposed to sit. They scattered through the cabin. One near the back, one in the middle, one much closer to me. They didn't look at each other directly, but I saw the tiny nods, the fleeting glances. My instincts screamed. They're together. One kept tapping his fingers on his leg in a precise rhythm. 3 taps. Bzz. 3 taps. Bzz. Like a signal to someone only he knew. Another adjusted something under his sleeve multiple times. Not a watch, something slimmer, darker. The third scanned the aisle more than his phone. His attention moved like a security camera, smooth, systematic. And then there was the moment that shattered any illusion of normal. Before we reached cruising altitude, before the seatbelt sign turned off, the man who kept staring at me stood up. A flight attendant rushed over immediately. "Sir, you need to be seated during takeoff." He sat down without protest. No argument. No embarrassment. Just obedience. Too quick. Too easy. Like he just wanted to test how fast someone would react. My stomach tightened. I glanced around to see if anyone else noticed. Most people were absorbed in their screens, headphones on, neck pillows already in place. I was alone with this feeling. When the captain announced we'd reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers relaxed. Trays came down. Bags rustled. Baby somewhere finally fell asleep. But all I could think was, there are people on this plane who aren't here to travel. They're here for something else. Maybe for me. The worst part was the growing certainty that the flight attendant's whisper and these men were connected. I didn't know how yet. But I knew this. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. And I was right in the middle of it. If you've ever felt truly watched, you know it's not just about someone's eyes on you. It's a weight, a pressure in the air. That's how the cabin felt. I tried to calm myself. I told myself to breathe, to stop staring at everyone like a paranoid maniac. I put my hands in my lap so no one would see them shaking. That's when he walked past. The man who'd kept turning around to look at me earlier stood up again, this time during drink service. He moved down the aisle like any other passenger heading to the bathroom. But as he passed my row, his hand moved. A small, folded piece of paper fell into my lap. He didn't pause. He didn't look at me. He just kept going. My heart pounded as I stared at the note. It looked harmless, like a receipt or a scrap ripped from a napkin. My fingers felt numb as I unfolded it. Inside, written in small, deliberate letters, were 4 words. Don't trust the attendant. My throat went dry. I flipped the paper over, my breath quickening. On the back there were more words. She's not who you think. Don't leave your seat. Someone is waiting. The plane suddenly felt smaller. The air thinner. I swallowed hard and tried to look normal as I folded the note again, my mind racing. Don't trust the attendant. The woman who whispered at me to get off the plane. The woman who had seemed so composed from afar, but whose eyes never stopped scanning. I looked toward the front of the cabin. She was there, smiling gently as she handed a drink to an elderly man. She laughed at something he said, touched his shoulder in that friendly, practiced way. But then her gaze flicked past him, straight toward my row. Eyes met. Her smile faltered. Only for a second, but I saw it. Then, as if remembering herself, she turned away and resumed her routine. I knew that look. It wasn't the look of someone who just tried to protect me. It was the look of someone who realized their plan hadn't worked. Because I was still on the plane. My heart hammered against my ribs, and a cold realization settled over me. She hadn't whispered to save me. She had tried to move me off the plane, away from witnesses, to somewhere someone was waiting. The betrayal stung in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't know this woman, but for a moment, I had wanted to believe she cared whether I lived or died. Now I wasn't so sure. I felt eyes on me again. I glanced sideways and saw one of the other men watching my hands, maybe checking if the note was still there. I closed my fist around it. The pieces started to connect in my mind in a terrifying way. The messages at home, the text about not being safe on the ground, the whisper, the strange coordination between the men. This wasn't random harassment. This wasn't a prank. This was a plan. And I was the center of it. The worst part. I couldn't tell who, if anyone, on this plane I could trust. All I had was a note. And a rapidly shrinking sense of safety. Fear is paralyzing until it isn't anymore. At some point, it stops being a fog and turns into something sharper. Anger. Determination. Survival. That's what happened to me. Sitting there with that note in my hand, I realized something. If I kept waiting for someone to rescue me, I might never leave that plane alive. I needed to act. So I made myself go still. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes halfway, and let my head tilt to the side, like someone drifting off after a long, tiring day. To anyone walking by, I looked asleep. But my ears were wide open. I listened. I heard the clink of ice in plastic cups, the murmur of passengers ordering drinks. Over it all, there were softer sounds. The rustle of clothing as someone shifted too often, the low murmur of hushed voices near the galley, the faint buzz of a phone on vibrate. At one point I heard the fake flight attendant. Though I didn't have proof yet, my instincts had already labeled her that. Whisper something to one of the men. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the tone. Low, tense, focused. Click followed. Not loud but distinct. Metal against metal, like something being locked into place. Or armed. My heart raced, but I didn't move. If they thought I was asleep, all the better. A few minutes later, footsteps approached my row. I felt a presence beside me. "Ma'am," a voice said quietly. I didn't answer. A hand lightly shook the top of my seat, then retreated when I didn't respond. Whoever it was moved on. But I needed a place to think. Place to move without eyes on me. Place with a lock. Bathroom. When the aisle quieted, I woke up, stretching slowly, rubbing my eyes, playing the role of a tired traveler shaking off a nap. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up casually. The second my hand reached toward the aisle, a grip closed around my wrist. Flinch. One of the men was there. Closer than I'd realized. His face was calm. "Come. You shouldn't be going anywhere right now," he said softly. I forced a confused smile. "I just need the restroom." He leaned in slightly. "Sit down, Amelia." Hearing my name from his mouth was like someone dumping ice water down my back. I hadn't given him my name. I hadn't spoken to him at all. I met his eyes. There was no kindness in them. No curiosity. Only knowledge. He knew exactly who I was. For a moment, real terror flooded my veins. But underneath it was something else, rage. They thought I was helpless. They thought I would obey. They thought I had nowhere to go. I smiled tightly. "Of course," I said, pretending to comply. I sat down again. He waited a beat, then moved away. The second his back turned, I slipped into the opposite aisle, ducked behind the service cart and crouched. My heart hammered, but my mind was clear. If they wanted to control where I moved, I needed to go somewhere they didn't expect. Not the bathroom. Cockpit. If anyone could help me, it was the pilots. And I was done being scared. From behind the service cart, the entire cabin looked different. I could see angles I hadn't seen before. The man near the back subtly checking his watch, the one in the middle adjusting his sleeve again, the fake flight attendant watching the aisle more than the passengers. I watched her pull out a small device from her apron pocket. It wasn't a standard airline phone or a tablet. It was slim, black, with a faint light. She tapped the screen quickly. Seconds later, one of the men checked his smartwatch and gave the slightest nod. They were in constant communication. My window for doing something was closing. I gripped the handle of the service cart. It was heavier than I expected, but adrenaline gave me strength. I waited until one of the men started walking toward the front, toward where my seat had been. Then I shoved the cart. It rolled forward faster than I'd planned, slamming into his legs. He stumbled, grabbing the seat back to steady himself. Passenger yelped. Someone dropped a cup. "Watch it," a voice snapped. "Yes, noise." Heads turned. The fake flight attendant spun around, eyes widening for a second before she forced them back under control. That second was all I needed. Bolted. I ran up the aisle, past rows of startled faces, past the galley, past the whispering flight attendant who shouted, "Ma'am, you can't be up here." I didn't stop. I ran straight to the cockpit door and pounded on it with my fist. "Please," he yelled. "Open the door. Someone is following me." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the door opened a crack, and I saw the face of the captain, older, gray-haired, with the deep lines of someone who'd spent his life in the air. His eyes flicked past me to the aisle, where the men had stopped short, pretending nothing was wrong. "What's going on?" he asked. "They know my name," I gasped. "She tried to get me off the plane. Someone gave me a note. Please just close the door." The co-pilot appeared behind him, younger, eyes narrowed with concern. The captain didn't hesitate long. "Come inside," he said. He took my arm and pulled me into the cockpit. The door shut behind me with a heavy, solid sound. Then I heard the lock. For the first time since boarding, I felt a sliver of safety. The cockpit was filled with glowing screens, buttons, levers. Through the windshield, clouds stretched in every direction, peaceful and indifferent to the chaos behind us. The co-pilot turned his chair slightly toward me. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Tell us everything." I did. I told them about the messages at home, the text about not being safe on the ground, the whisper from the flight attendant, the staring man, the three who boarded last, the note. The captain and co-pilot exchanged a look that made my skin prickle. Finally, the co-pilot sighed. "We received something too," he said. The captain nodded. "Before takeoff, the airline sent a security alert. Anonymous tip. Very specific." My mouth went dry. "About what?" "About a female passenger," the co-pilot said quietly. "Targeted for an abduction attempt. Possibly involving someone impersonating crew." My heart lurched. "A flight attendant," I whispered. The captain's jaw tightened. It didn't give names. Just patterns. Behaviors to watch for. We were told to stay alert and report anything unusual upon landing. He looked at me. "Then you showed up at our door," he added, "with the exact kind of story we were warned about." The truth hit me like turbulence. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had planned to take me. And the flight attendant who whispered at me. She wasn't trying to save me. She was plan A. Once I was in the cockpit, the pilots did what they did best. Took control. The captain picked up the radio and contacted ground security. His voice was calm, professional, almost unnervingly steady as he described a possible in-flight security concern, and requested that law enforcement meet the plane on arrival. The co-pilot asked for the note. I handed it to him with trembling fingers. He read it, eyes narrowing. "This handwriting isn't rushed," he said. "Whoever wrote it took their time." "Passenger," I said. "Man in row 9. He's the only one who tried to help me." The captain looked thoughtful. "We were told there might be undercover protection on this flight as well." Protection. For a moment, the idea that someone out there actually cared whether I survived made my eyes sting. "What about her?" I asked quietly. "The flight attendant." The captain didn't answer right away. "We can't make accusations mid-flight," he said finally. "If she is who you say she is, confronting her in the cabin could put everyone at risk." "So what do we do?" I whispered. "We watch," he said. "We cooperate with the authorities on the ground. And we make sure you are not alone for 1 second when this plane lands." Time moved strangely after that. The co-pilot escorted me back to the cabin but didn't let me go back to my original seat. Instead, he placed me in the very front row, directly in their line of sight, where they could see me every time the cockpit door opened. The men I'd been afraid of before glanced my way again. 2 of them now looked less like predators and more like people assessing a situation. The third, the one who'd grabbed my wrist, refused to look at me at all. The fake flight attendant kept her distance from the front for a while. But eventually she had to come closer. When she did, her eyes flicked to me. I watched her face. The moment she saw I was seated in the front, close to the cockpit, her expression changed. Just slightly, just for a heartbeat. Her jaw tightened. Her hand clenched around the drink tray. Then it was gone. But I'd seen it. And so had the co-pilot watching from a few rows away. The rest of the flight felt like a long, slow exhale I couldn't complete. When we finally descended, the wheels hitting the runway with a familiar jolt, my hands were still shaking. We taxied to the gate and waited. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are waiting for final clearance from ground staff. Thank you for your patience." I knew that wasn't the full truth. Out the small oval window beside me, I saw them. Vehicles with flashing lights, clustered near the gate. Figures in dark uniforms waiting. The seatbelt sign turned off. But nobody stood up. Then 2 men in uniforms boarded. Not security for the airline, law enforcement. They walked straight past me. Straight to her. The flight attendant's eyes widened as they approached. She smiled automatically, as if she could charm her way out of whatever this was. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we need you to come with us." Confusion rippled through the cabin. Passengers whispered. Heads turned. Her smile trembled. There must be some mistake. But when she caught my eyes over their shoulders, something icy flashed across her face. It wasn't confusion. It was hatred. She knew exactly why they were there. And she knew exactly who had ruined their plan. Me. After everything, the arrests, the questions, the hours spent in a small room at the airport with detectives and agents, I walked out into the terminal feeling like a ghost. The world outside the glass walls carried on as if nothing had changed. Planes took off. Families reunited. People hurried past with rolling suitcases and coffee cups, checking their phones, complaining about delays. No one knew that one quiet, ordinary flight had almost ended with me vanishing between the gate and the exit. I stood by a window and watched a plane taxi away from the terminal. Its engines roared, but all I could hear was that whisper again. You have to get off this plane. Immediately. For a long time I was angry about that line. Angry at her. Angry at myself. Angry at the fact that I had been turned into a target without my consent, without even understanding why. The investigators explained pieces of it. The fake flight attendant was tied to a group that specialized in abductions, people who slipped into roles that society inherently trusted. Nurses, drivers, staff, crew. They chose airports because people are always moving, always distracted, always anonymous. My name, my face, my routine. Somewhere along the way, I had crossed paths with the wrong person, seen something I hadn't understood, or simply fit a profile they needed. The text telling me I wasn't safe on the ground. That had likely come from the same people who later tipped off the airline. Apparently, someone on the inside had grown a conscience. That thought stayed with me. Someone had tried to warn me. Someone else had tried to take me. And in the middle of that war, I had been silent, confused, terrified, but not powerless. If I had left the plane when she told me to, I would have stepped into a hallway with no witnesses, no cameras pointing the right way, and no pilots paying attention to my name. Instead I stayed. Not because I was brave. Not because I was smart. But because something inside me refused to move without understanding why. That same instinct made me notice the men. Made me read the note. Made me push the cart. Made me run to the cockpit door. That is what saved me. We like to imagine warnings as pure things. Clear, good, obvious. But sometimes the warning comes from the very person who wants to hurt you. Her whisper wasn't meant to protect me. It was meant to isolate me. But it did something she never intended. It woke me up. Made me pay attention. Made me question everything. It made me listen to the one voice I had been ignoring for weeks. My own. Now, when I walk through airports or down dark streets or into empty parking garages, I don't dismiss that feeling in my chest anymore. If something feels wrong, I believe it. Because in the end, it wasn't the uniform or the badge or the calm smile of a stranger that saved me. It was the quiet decision inside my own mind. I will not move just because someone tells me to. I will move when my instincts agree. And that, more than any whisper, is what truly kept me alive.